designated safeguarding leads or deputies need any support, then they come to me. Sarah, meanwhile, looks overall in terms of school improvement and the whole safeguarding policies, procedures, and anything else additional that you need within school. So together we support you in a wholesome way, if you like. And the audit tonight, which is the training you're on, is for you to ensure that you've asked the questions of your school staff, and that's all of them, so that, you know, if there's any gaps that you're thinking, oh, there's certain staff, certain procedures that aren't quite as good as they could be, then from a governance point of view, you can ask for those to be addressed.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Ask questions as we go through, and I'm going to keep an eye on the chat.
Perfect. So any questions at any time, just use that chat facility. Again, if you want to put your hand up, there's the raise the hand element. And again, if you want to show reactions, feel free to do that. It's your time as governors. I'll always say by saying we can't do what we do without you as governors supporting our schools. I just want to tonight again celebrate, I guess, through this presentation, some of the things that we're proud about in terms of what we've had in previous years in terms of the audit, and also to align it a little bit more in terms of the recent legislation and the changes. So I'm going to take you through the audit, but we're also going to focus a little bit in terms of, so when you're actually looking at that audit, when it's presented to you as governors, how do you actually fine-tune that evidence base? And is there a line of inquiry that you might want to take as governors? Is there something else that you want to ask more questions about within schools? So hopefully at the end of the presentation today, you'll certainly have some confidence in terms of your attendance, your audit going forward, how that links, for example, to the new attendance framework, things in terms of, you know, are you confident that everything in keeping children safe in education is implemented into practice? And these are just the key things that I'm wanting to pull through this evening with you. So we're going to cover things around policy procedures, things around safe recruitment. We're going to talk a little bit about confidence of handling allegations and what that looks like when head teachers are providing reports to you. We're going to talk a little bit in terms of our One Family approach, things around what our new acronym is for our CMAS, which is our Children's Resiliency Board in North Lincolnshire, things that we call shine a light areas. So these are things which we know through data are our key safeguarding priorities. And we're going to just really ask you to reflect a little bit when you go back into schools in terms of what does that look like, and are we all actually moving towards what we believe our priorities are in North Lincolnshire in terms of protection for children and adults. We're going to talk a little bit in terms of training, what should that look like, things about deficiencies, how do DSLs talk to you in terms of their audit, which should be completed by the 14th of December this year, not 12th of December. And we're going to talk a little bit in terms of how do you scrutinise the audit when it's presented to you. But more importantly than anything, it's how do we actually encourage schools to actually say that they're doing good. Because what I'm finding at the moment is we've got some great pieces of work going off in all of our schools in terms of safeguarding, but it's the hardest thing for somebody to say, this is what we're really proud about. And that's been a deficiency in our previous audits, where when I've been looking, there's only a few schools who come forward to actually say we're really proud of this. And I'd like to see that captured this year as we go forward. So if we're talking about legislation, why do we have the audit? Obviously, what we're talking about here is aligning that assurance in terms of our statutory legislation. Obviously, Children's Act amended 2004. We look at the working together statutory guidance, and we certainly look at keeping children safe in education. And we align that every year in terms of our safeguarding audit, but it doesn't cover everything. So I think that's the caveat. Our annual safeguarding audit that we send into you through our local authority, it's agreed and it's consulted with, but it's not everything. So if you look at keeping children safe in education, it's an entirety. I think there's around 560 aspects for governors in terms of just checking schools, in terms of the assurances that leaders are actually working in compliance with that. And it's your duty as a governor to make sure that that's happening. So when we're talking about the latest changes for working together, I've just tried to summarise, and all I'm going to do is star a couple of things. There is some roadshows, and there is some working together courses available on the CMARS website. So again, it may be from this session you think, I actually want to know a little bit more about that. And you can actually put yourself on that training too if you want to do. But when we're looking at working together 2023, one of the main things I want to bring out is through our annual audit, we're capturing things around how do you as a school empower parents and carers to participate in decision making, and how do you equip your parents with information and keep them updated. So that might be something that you might want to consider as a governor, to actually do what I call a deep dive. So it may be that you want to think about that in its entirety, and actually take a little look about how do you communicate, when do you communicate, where does that communication go? Is there a different language that it can be translated into? Is there an aspect that you've got that evidence base within when you've shared information, and what does that look like? And is it the fact that actually you need to look at any gaps? And again, what I always ask is if you've got tech savvy monitoring and filtering systems now, which most of you will have as a school, is does it actually tell you the reads? So we actually know who's reading and who's not, and do we need to look at our communication strategy differently? When we're looking at working together 2023 again, it lists again things in terms of how it's going to look as we move forward, and it talks about an acronym here because we're great at acronyms. So we're talking about local safeguarding partnerships. That's basically our CMARS board in North Lincolnshire. But it does talk about the fact that we need to work more with our voluntary sector organisations, sports clubs, and we need to think about how we work within those settings. And that's why the audit this year has dropped in a few more questions around how does schools engage with, and we're asking for that evidence base. There's some really interesting element here though in terms of why do we have the audit again? Because if you look at working together 2023 again in its entirety, it talks very much about education providers, including multi-agency trusts, having that responsibility to play in local safeguarding arrangements. And it talks about not being limited to safeguarding audits or the quality of compliance and policies consistent. And it talks about things around it shouldn't be limited to this audit. So that's what I'm just really reiterating here. This is only part of one of your really key documents, I feel, as a governor, that you can build on year from year, and you can actually have some really tangible evidence ready for inspection in terms of just what confidence you can give to that inspection process in saying, as a governor, you do this because of, and you actually do have that responsibility to challenge your school leaders in terms of how they actually implementing working together 2023, keeping children safe in education, and is this audit really quality? So in terms of working together 2023, again, we talk about a lot of elements within providing help, support and protection. You know, is that clear? You know, things around this question in particular, specific needs should be considered, such as disabilities and those whose language isn't first language isn't English, fathers or male carers, and parents who identify as LGBTQ. I expect that's a really new question, and that's not in our audit this year. But that's something you might want to consider, because we've got till December to implement working together 2023. And I suspect that next year's audit will be revising with some questions just to check how tuned in our schools are to this new legislation. So that's just something I wanted to put out there, just to give you that flavour of what might be coming up as well in the future. So when we're talking about social care assessments and promoting the welfare of children, we know it's got to be right at that earliest opportunity, and we know that assessments should consider parenting capacity of both resident and non-resident parents and carers, as well as any other adult living in that household. We know that assessments should consider the influence of that child's family network and any other adults living in the household, as well as the impact on the wider community and environment. That probably now you're thinking, wow, you know, where do we go with that? For colleagues in the room who've been governors for a while, and you've gone through a number of keeping children safe in education changes, you possibly would have seen that as contextualised safeguarding at some stage. You possibly then could have had that within what we had risks outside the home, which we've now had to change locally to harms outside the home. And And that's something as we go forward, we'll pick up in terms of shine light areas. I've highlighted there the hidden fathers agenda, because really interesting this from when we analyse a lot of our cases is how often we've not got that father within a social network. If they are separated, what does that look like? And actually, even if they're not separated, are we addressing letters in the school context to both parents? Are both parents invited? Is it addressed just to the mum often? Or do we actually have that approach of a school where we actually have Mr. and Mrs. if we know that there's that collective? So actually fathers step up and they've got some responsibility as well. And certainly when we move into our formal planning and we move into our designated safeguarding leads, who may from time to time have to complete reports for conference, we're talking about the voice of both parents within that and that being shared. So that's something I just want you to think about in terms of, is your school friendly in terms of including the fathers within any guidance or letters that you put out into the homes. Because quite often it tends to be the mum who gets that information. In terms of our annual safeguarding report, I have to present that to what we call our CMARS board, and we did that, and I had to do that in April this year. And one of the recommendations which were agreed as part of that CMARS board was for Helen. And we've got Sharon in early years, we've got Karen, and we've got myself, and we're just the little small education safeguarding team who sits within education standards. So we're not your front door social work, we're not your SPOT, we're not your IMAP, but we're here to improve schools and support you and your head teacher and your school leaders and every DSL, DDSL across every school and setting in North Links. So what we came up with, and which they agreed with, is we would continue to work of course, with all our schools and our multi-academy trusts. We would continue to develop the audit and provide assurances and would actually put into there any challenge that's needed. So the report's due to come in on the 12th of December. What happens over Christmas is I will look through every single audit. I will do an individual email back to every single school, and occasionally I might make some suggestions for what I'd like to see within that audit. Sometimes it may be that school's on the third year of actually having a really excellent audit, and I'll actually say that and praise that as well when needed, because we do get some really quality audits coming through with some really detailed evidence. It's variable, so that's my plea again to you as governors, is have a look for me when your audit is presented to you. Have they actually really gone into detail in terms of the evidence against that, or have they just ticked yes in place? I really want to see some evidence coming through. Yeah, so that's probably where I'll go with that, because I've got some more slides coming up in a little while just to demonstrate some good practice with the audit this year. We did agree again to build in a monitoring cycle for the annual audit. So I don't know if we've got any APIP. We've not got any APIP providers here this evening, but we've done that, and I've done that with the lead school improvement for APIP. So we make sure that the audit now goes out to all them providers as well. We wanted to make sure we facilitated further partnership development, and we talk about this family hub development and the one family approach. That today is still here, isn't it, Ellen? It's still developing, and it's something we've recognised for probably the last 2 years. But I do now know that our family hub, and we will have 3 pods, and every school now will have a lead worker within what we call our family hubs and our pods. And I think that's a great step forward. We've just agreed that over the last week. Details will go into school very shortly. So I think that's going to really strengthen that whole idea of schools knowing who to go to find out more information. So we've put that question within our audit this year because we wanted to find out, as the DSL, DDSL actually walked into the nearest family hub, have they actually been to see what's on offer? And sometimes the answer's no. And sometimes we don't know what's on offer until we actually walk into one. But Helen, do you want to just comment? So we're going to look at the locality meetings as well, where DSLs and DDSLs are going to actually be able to opportunity to meet as a network within those forums as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as Sarah's just said, it's a developing offer. So the localities are, for those of you that have been in position for a while, it's our old children's centres. But we're looking at Scunthorpe South, which will be Ashby area for a family hub. Then you've got Brigg and Barton area, so that'll be Brigg and Barton coming together as a family hub. And then you've got Scunthorpe North, which is West Street and the Isle. They're the key locality areas. So all your schools will be furnished with information, as Sarah's just said, and then a linked kind of named team leader will be assigned to each school. So they'll have a direct link for all that early help work. So in terms of the audit, it's probably useful for you to know that this is happening so you can question your designated safeguarding leads and your school leaders as to whether or not they've been made that link, and if they know that they can communicate directly with those people, because that'll all strengthen that working for families.
Absolutely. One of the things which we have seen year on year slight increase in, it's not yet there for 100% of our schools, is for your designated safeguarding leads. And if your designated safeguarding lead is your head teacher, for example, is how do they access crucial support and encourage supervision? So we have actually supported a head teacher this week who over the holidays really struggled with one case, and she was honest to say, you know, I could really do with some support. And that's something through the audit last year I did collect in terms of just what that offer looks like and how some schools are purchasing that supervision, how some schools are linking to with me in mind, and how some schools have actually got their own arrangements in place through HR facilities or what else they have in terms of online support. And posters within the schools will reflect to me very much in terms of the health and well-being of staff. So that's my main thing, is to check in and just to find out whether that is quality supervision and they are actually feeling that they can talk to people, because quite often it can be a lonely role if you are that designated safeguarding lead and you've got a number of cases. So that's my plea. I'd really love to get that to 100%, and we can only do that through governors supporting that. To continue to promote and celebrate the sharing of best practice to future DSL briefings and conferences. I really want to get behind this. Because like I say, we've got some great stuff going off, and we have a DSL briefing every 3 months. And I always now involve a school in terms of sharing something that they've done well. So we can actually all share that as part of our safeguarding community. So when we talked about what happened in 2000, it should be 2022 and 2023 and to now. What happened in 2022, they highlighted 4 areas that we had to work on, which are there, things around supervision, things about being part of that MAT arrangement, things around governors and trustees, accessing appropriate safeguarding training, and things around exploring, working together to improve school attendance. And then what we did as a team in taking that forward, we could report back that schools were accessing supervision from ELSA, North Lincolnshire Counselling, and with me in mind, like I've just said. So we did have some evidence base coming forward to say we were improving that. In terms of our assurances, we received assurances from every single multi-academy trust in terms of the audit, and when there were any gaps, we actually went to their regional leads, and we actually got that assurance in writing, so we needed to align it to make sure that our reports back to CMA's board were accurate. And again, we talked about that offer for governors and do you receive CPD? And again, Helen and myself worked on revising the programme for you this year. And in addition, I know you've got online learning courses and you can access everything on the CMA's website as well, if you want to do so. And we talked about section 4 of the safeguarding audit, including some real key questions around policy procedures, child voice. So we could actually really start to demonstrate to the CMA's board just what we are doing to support you as schools as well. So when we talk about the impact summary against the recommendations, again, I was really, really happy to go to the board to say we've got 100% in the number of areas in terms of our responses this year. And we know that there's an increase. And sometimes it might not be a great increase, but it's showing that we're working towards. And that was just some of the headline figures there from the audit last year. Achievements, again, 100% response rate from every school in North Lincolnshire. You can't get better than that. And I just think that, again, is down to you to go back and to your head teachers, to your schools and say thank you, because we do need them responses coming through in order for us to meet our statutory duty as well as a local authority. And it's not just about what we need, and it's not just about what I need. for that oversight and challenge. If you look there, sometimes different partnership boards ask for key information from your audits. So every audit is analysed, it's put onto an Excel spreadsheet, and we can do demographics around that. We can look at area, we can look at location, we can drill down into certain particular sections. So for example, there, when we're looking at the prevent agenda, if someone's asking us a question around assurances, we have that at hand, and it gives us a really quick opportunity to report within all these reports in terms of just the good work which schools are doing. So I do want to just emphasise that as well. We don't just sit on this audit. It becomes a tool that we do use and we share within our other meetings. So following all of that, we took it all in. We looked at what you said to us in your last audit, and then we had to address the themes which were emerging. So we knew we had to develop the early help locality model. We knew there had to be a continued development within our family hubs, and we knew what we had to do to address that. So there's currently a new head of family help who's called Matthew Clayton, and Matthew's been out to a couple of schools with me, and it shows that progression in terms of understanding just what the school landscape is looking like within North Lincs. We knew we had to look at our alternative provision, IP provision, and we've got a school improvement dedicated officer now in place who's monitoring that, and I work with Martin Halliday in terms of just checking in terms of compliance and quality within those settings. And we knew we had to do something in terms of that supervision question, that burning question, so we put it into our DSL briefings as well. And again, finally, we needed to continue to celebrate and recognise our schools within this agenda. So your audit looks like this. You'll get a front page. We always start with a why. So why do we need to complete the audit? As I've already said, we do it because we need to do our statutory compliance, which is here. So if we're looking at the Children's Act, we're looking at the Education Act. What this falls under is Section 11 of the Children's Act, where basically that says to a local authority, how do you know all your schools are good? How do you discharge your functions? And what is the evidence that you can give in terms of all your education provision meeting their safeguarding statutory duty? And we do that through what we call our Section 175 and our Section 157. It's exactly the same audit. It just depends whether you're an academy or whether you're maintained in terms of the section of that Education Act. So it is set in law really in terms of the why and the rationale why we do it. But I think we do it because we also need to keep continually improving with safeguarding, and we might do it for this, but actually I feel it's a much more better tool for us as leaders within schools to actually own something and have something that we can easily put our hand on for inspection as well, to actually say this is what we know and this is what we know we're good at. So again, it talks about all you having a statutory duty under these areas, to have your policies in place, you know, to have your DSLs, to have arrangements for governors to champion safeguarding. Then it talks a lot in terms of your procedures, your training, your recruitment procedures within school, and that great single central record, which is always looked at within your inspection without a doubt. And then it talks about filtering and monitoring, which we knew was a really big learning for us all last year. And I think this year going forward, I would hope to see 100% of our schools will now say that there's something in place in terms of that confidence that you are monitoring and filtering your ICT systems within schools. I'm seeing lots of questions, Helen, coming through. Should we pause for questions if we've got lots coming through before I'm
on the answers, don't worry.
Oh, you're on it. Thank you. I'm just seeing little things pinging as I'm talking. So I just wanted to make sure you're doing that. Thank you. Helen's so good at doing this. She'll be putting in links and things as we're talking. I know she will. So yeah, in terms of the audit then, this is what it looks like. It came out obviously in an email to all schools. It came out just, I think, as I recall, we had a very busy summer, didn't we, Helen? So it was things around policy, needs to be changed within there. We needed to put new Keeping Children Safe in Education, updated training, and the audit came in, I think it was about September time, early September, giving you 3 months to complete it for the 12th of December. And the changes this year's audits were to capture more in terms of your improved attendance element, which makes sense because we needed to do that in line with the new September working together to improve school attendance guidance. And this great shine a light section. So we'll talk a little bit more about that soon, because we needed to capture that for our CMAS board. And we've already said it underpins our legislation in terms of what we do. So what's in your toolbox? I guess question is for governors, how do you know your school's good at safeguarding? You know, what do you do at the moment? What does that look like? And fire away in chat, or, you know, feel free to have a little bit of a conversation at the moment. Because if you're presented with that audit, how do you know? How do you check it out? What do you do to get that fabric and feel of safeguarding? And it's only, for me, a document. You've got to make it come alive sometimes, haven't you, in testing certain areas? So I'd be really interested to know from practitioners and governors in the room this evening is, how have you used it over a year? And do you use it over a year? Or do you just fill it in once a year? You know, and open that up to you all as governors, you know, share with me. Is it this all new? Is anybody brave enough to say we've actually filled one in before and signed it off?
Sarah, I'll just kick up. I was a governor at a primary school where my children went a few years ago, but I used to go in just, you know, and it was a bit of a surprise to this particular primary school. This is a lot of years ago, by the way. But, you know, you do a bit of a wander around, you check in, you just talk to people. Yeah, well done. So thanks, James, you do the same. And also, what I would say from a governor point of view, find the staff that are maybe new, whether it's a new dinner lady, lunchtime supervisor, or a new teacher. Have, you know, and just quiz them. Have they been made aware of what they need to do and who need to speak to if they've got concerns? Because that's a really good benchmark. Wearing my hat as a previous governor to sort of say, yeah, actually, it's embedded throughout the school, you know, family, if you like.
Any more thoughts in terms of how you might be able to?
James wanders round Fred Goff.
Yeah, you can often find me wandering around. I tend to try and go over a lunch period so that we actually can speak to the students and staff. And we literally, Joe just gives me free rein to wander around and stop any student I want to.
That's really good practice, though.
Yeah.
Because if the children
different times,
yeah. And Nikki said the same sort of thing. They do safety walks and questionnaires. Thanks, Nikki.
Yeah, and I think your safety walks can really align to some areas in this audit as well. So I always work by connections and connecting things. That's the way my mind's always worked. So if I look at keeping children safe in education in all its sections and try to align it to this audit in terms of the sections, this year I did put in brackets where it linked to keeping children safe in education. I think that's a really good starting point, isn't it, to say, do you pace yourself for over a year to focus on a certain area? Or is it that your DSL's already told you in a very good action plan, this is the area we want to work on? And then how do you support them as a governor going forward? So great, we've got Christina saying, I'm seeing messages now, they're popping up for some reason. So.
Sonia's got a hand up, Sarah. Hi, Sonia.
Hi. Yeah, I was just going to say, with the schools that I'm involved with, so there's actually 4 primary schools overall, and with regards to the audit, chair of governors on both schools there would go round with the principal head teacher to do the audit in person. And then in addition to that, I recently did a parental engagement activity at the Grange Primary School, and within that activity, when parents were coming in, I did ask them the question around safeguarding, children feeling safe, and then the children as well, a little bit like one of the people on here, I can't remember who it was, James, I think, saying about talking to the actual students themselves as well. Do they feel safe? Do they want to come to school? You know, that kind of thing. So we've kind of covered it, because I think safeguarding is one of those holistic things that spreads across everything, and it's really difficult to isolate it just to doing safeguarding, because you actually do come across it on all activities.
You do, you're right. Thank you for that. It's
a really lovely approach as well. I like how you've done that in terms of wider consultation, doing that. I call it grabbing the moment, really, seizing that opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you, Nikki. Yeah,
that's really helpful. And
I think, and
keep
again,
sharing. I think this is really good because this tonight is about you as governors supporting each other as well. I don't know if you get an opportunity outside this to share what's going off in your school in terms of safeguarding, but I like to always say we're a safeguarding community, and it'd be really good if you all keep sharing with each other. I don't know how you do that other than these meetings, so it may be that I speak with Sarah, and if you're happy, you all just check in from time to time with each other and share that with each other.
I think certainly what's coming through, and it's lovely that you're here tonight, but it sounds as though you are asking those critical friend questions. You know, you're on the shoulders just making sure, because at the end of the day, it's to support your school to be the safest it can be.
It absolutely is. It's to do sharing. Apologies, I'm in a goosey sense, but I'm fine. I can keep delivering this to you all this evening. So as we're moving through the audit, this is what I just want to highlight for this year for everybody. So I really would like every school in North Lincolnshire to tell me a little bit about an area of outstanding or active safeguarding practice. That's a toughie, but I would really like to see something coming through from every school, and something that you might want us to report to the board. So some schools last year were telling us about how they'd continued post-COVID with food parcels, things around adult family learning opportunities, things about how they'd connected to the wider community, things in terms of even taking part in new projects within schools. So I think it'd be really good if you can take that back to your school and try to grab something, because DSLs are very humble people and they don't like saying we've done good. I'm finding that, and we need to really celebrate what they're doing within our settings. So as you move through the audit, you'll start off with your policies and your wider safeguarding section, and these are just some questions which I've added for the slide for this evening. You'll all get a copy of these slides, so don't worry, you don't have to keep taking notes down. Or it may be that you reflect on this as a group and go, actually, Sarah, we ask this and we do it better. And that's okay. So I think we'll make an agreement. I'll probably do no more than a minute a slide, Helen. And then I'll either take silence as move it on, or please, everybody contribute. Let's make this a team effort tonight with this audit. So when we're looking at policies, obviously, it's does your school adapt or adopt our policy? I'd like to know that. We did ask for a QR code to be completed. We've only had 4 schools tell us that they're adopting the policy, which I suspect a lot more schools in North Lincolnshire are using our policy as a model. So I'd really like you to give me some feedback on that. You know, have you actually tried to access your latest child protection policy on your website? And is it easy to find? As a parent, if I wanted to Google that, could I actually find that easily? Or does it send me to a couple of different pages? Is there a version for children, so children actually know where to go and how to raise concerns? And my wonder always is, do children actually know how to raise a concern if they've got an issue about a staff member? Because that's sometimes really hard for somebody to find if you're a child. So that's what I'll part with you all as an inquisitive, curious question to ask. Things around, are you checking understanding of keeping children safe in education? What does that look like? And how many schools did actually do and use our CMAS, Keeping Children Safe in Education, training slides in September, which Karen Hackett and myself worked on over the summer. And again, it's things around, are we confident that we've done that? Is there an example child version of a policy? Actually, no. I've seen it within some schools with the anti-bullying. It's sometimes in pictures, and I have seen it on an A4 poster for some schools in terms of what does it mean. So that might be something you want to consider. Is it easy for me as a child to understand safeguarding? And that's part of your questioning, isn't it, within schools? Or do you want to develop that? DFE used to have a template, Helen, because I know they did, and it were under Children's Commissioner. And I'm just parking that because I'm a creative soul. And I do think that if we have got a children's safeguarding policy, is it understandable for who it's about, which is the children, isn't it? That's a thought this evening as we go forward. So when we're looking at policies,
yeah, it's a very good question, Sonia, and I think Sarah and I will chat about that a bit more.
Yeah. Or is it that they know on their webpage within school who to contact in terms of NSPCC, for example, and national charities when schools are not open over a summer holiday or on a weekend or on an evening? I used to always say to my young people I worked with, if I showed you my hand, who was your 5 trusted adults that you'd go to? And it might be that that's what children do within your setting, so you have that confidence of who they know they can go to, because you're only in children's lives for a little bit, aren't you, with schools? And again, things around when we're looking at the question, does a governing body have assurance that the school's safeguarding policy and procedure effective? You're telling me you're doing that and you're checking that, so that's great. What that actually looked like holistically over North Lincolnshire last year when we did, you can't really see this unless you've got really good glasses, but it is 100%, almost 100% on every question when it comes to policies and procedures. So we do know from the feedback last year, schools were actually telling us that this was in place and they were meeting our statutory duties in terms of publishing policies. And there were some minor, not 100%. And when we analysed the findings, it was mainly due to APIP providers, or it was the fact that the policies were under review. So I would expect that to be 100%. It's statutory. Every school has to have a safeguarding policy, and it does have to be reviewed annually. So any school that says not in place, that would be a red flag for me, and would need to actually have a conversation and support you as governors to make sure that happens. When you look at leadership and management, again, you're talking about your check-ins with your head teacher, you're talking about your head teacher reports, you're checking about how you do that and how you talk to your school leaders. And there's a question there around, does your DSL actually have that within the job description, or is it something that's added on to the other 3 duties? And do you actually know what a job description looks like for a DSL, or know where to find it? So when you're actually talking about, is your school really working and strengthening safeguarding through actually being very clear about that role of a DSL, does it look like that? Does your DSL carry out these duties, which is actually within keeping children safe in education? There's an annex there, and it talks very much around this is what your DSL within your school should be accountable for and deliver. So I think that's a helpful slide for you to again reflect on in terms of, are you seeing this within your school? And Helen, I think you might want to do a shout out like me. Every school that I've been into and every DSL I've worked with have been absolutely incredible in terms of their contributions to safeguarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Sarah summed it up really, but yeah, all of you are sat here today, but I don't think we have any concerns that people aren't doing, your designated leads aren't doing the best that they can, but it's sometimes quite a tough job.
Yeah, it is. So I think that's your challenge, is just checking that they've got that time to attend meetings.
When I say tough job, it's more because of the communities which we're all now living in and things that are going on for family life, really.
So needless to say, coming back to my little graphs from last year, the lowest response on there was about access to supervision. So that's something I would like to see increase this year through responses. Filtering and monitoring, you did a marvellous job last year, and I know that one new for a lot of schools to grapple with, and I know a lot of schools went out there, and I think we looked and there were around I think there were about 20 providers from our responses last year in terms of filtering and monitoring, with the main question which came from filtering and monitoring more than anything was how your DSL linked to that provider. So they were very much in tune to what were actually being seen or accessed. And that was the only thing that came out of last year's analysis of that question. So we've kept it in for this year, because we'd like to see that the schools last year who only gave us a little bit of a response, which I'm looking now because I've got it was a here. So if you look here, we've got 72% of schools telling us that they made decisions on what was being blocked, allowed and why. I would have liked your schools to be involved a little bit more with that, especially if you're going to a provider, because I think that's really important that you get to know what's being accessed and what's being blocked and why it's being blocked. And again, if you looked at have you informed staff or third parties of their roles and responsibilities for monitoring and filtering, that were pretty low. I think, and I hope, as we've gone forward this year, because at the time, these responses tended to reflect schools where you were talking with possible providers for filtering and monitoring, and you'd not actually got it all working just yet. So I would hope that that will be really strengthened. I don't know if anyone's got any examples in the room this evening of what's worked well in terms of filtering and monitoring, and if you can give me some feedback. Be brave, take off your microphones. What's working well for you?
We do have at our school, they've implemented something new, but I can't remember what it's called, honestly. But as soon as you go online, teachers, children, if there's going to be something like, if you type just Kunto, some things are coming up like that's not relevant to the school. So that's going to pop up straight away and it's going to go to the head teacher as a notification that someone has accessed something. So it's very new, but it's very, very effective.
That's good to know, though. That's good to know.
Yeah, and then what's done with that and how is it shared with the DSL? And for young people, sometimes they've got inquisitive minds, and it's not to say they've done anything wrong, because we don't want to give them that. But again, it's sometimes that cry out or that support in terms of what they're researching in school and why. So I think it's really is a really good thing that we actually get to know in terms of what sites young people are accessing and why. Thank you. I'm just looking at all the things popping up at the same time. So yeah, I'm expecting a really good report to CMARS this year in terms of just how we've improved from them 80% to get up to nearly 100% on them answers. Then we move in terms of allegations and just what that looks like in terms of understanding. It's always the head teacher, unless it's about them, who should actually handle any allegation against a member of staff or anyone in a paid public capacity, or what we talk about now is adults in a position of trust. And that is really interesting because sometimes a head teacher might delegate that straight away to a DSL. But certainly when I attend LADOs, if I don't see a head teacher in a LADO, I'm wanting that assurance that the head teacher's been made fully aware of that allegation, because that is what it says in Keeping Children Safe in Education. And again, if you're not aware of training coming up, there's some fabulous training through Helen Myers, who is our current local authority designated officer. And I think it's January the 25th, the next one, and that is specifically for school leaders. And we would have no problem with governors if you think you're going to be part of any LADO in your designated role as a safeguarding lead, in supporting, for example, if an allegation is against the head teacher. So I think it's really key training if you believe that that potentially could be one of your roles as well as a governor. If you are, don't worry, don't leave the meeting now, because there's always support at hand, and would make a really good decision in terms of whether you, again, feel confident in actually taking up some of that role on behalf of LADO. So that's where that is in terms of where we are. And when we're talking about how do you know that and what does that look like, hopefully your head teacher reports will talk to you about any concerns that have gone through to LADO, not in the entirety because you can't, but even if it's a number and you've got that confidence, the low level concerns being addressed within your school policy. Filtering and monitoring, there was an interesting addition this year, which we talked about the feature of artificial intelligence. And is that within any of your current policies, whether you've got that within your social media or your ICT policy? And there's DFE statutory guidance on that. So when I say, if you're unsure of any of these highlighted questions, I always go to DFE rather than asking Google. From the DFE website, put in artificial intelligence, it'll give you the latest guidance for schools in terms of what you ought to consider as a school when we're moving into this world of artificial intelligence. I don't know if anyone in the room again's got examples of how you've developed that or what that looks like. There you go. Come on, James, you're in the room. Thank you. Just Can James talk, or is it James just chatting? Yeah. Oh, James, talk to me about what you've done then.
Yeah,
did that come in around artificial intelligence?
We've done the audit this year, purely so that everybody is available to be able to do it. And this came up, the artificial intelligence. We've got a full governors meeting in 2 weeks' time. We're taking a draft policy now to the governors board to look at the implications and artificial intelligence, how it's going to affect education, how it can affect FredGoff, etc.
Beautiful example. Don't worry if you're a governor in the room thinking, wow, you know, James has just mentioned he's already created and contributed to a policy and it's going forward to whole governors for consideration. But we've put that in there quite rightly to align to where the DfE latest guidance is as well for schools. So that's I've just highlighted that because that might be a nice line of inquiry for you as a governor to ask that question when you get back into your school. Section 4, we all know about attendance. Again, it was really good to know last year, as we thought, 100% of our schools did actually tell us that they can recognise children missing education. They know what that means, and they know that they can identify potential issues such as neglect, sexual abuse, child sexual and criminal exploitation. And we wouldn't expect anything less, would we, Helen, in terms of our schools. In terms of only 96% of schools saying that they did actually have an attendance policy, which staff and students understood, the ones who said no last year were the ones who were still actually developing that policy or said it was still to be ratified. So we had some confidence around that. So things that we needed to look at a little bit more was just things around monitoring that attendance and what that looks like. And I certainly know when I go into schools, they're on it. There's the attend framework for the local authority, and we do know that you are looking very closely at severely absent children, SA, you're looking at your persistent absence, your PA children, and you're certainly, hopefully, mapping what your school is doing against the table of school responsibilities as defined in the new DfE, working together to improve attendance. Because that's a beautiful document to look at in terms of it gives very clear accountability in terms of what the school can do and what the local authority can do to support attendance. And I don't know if you've got any examples again within the room that you want to share about how you check the school's compliance against working together to improve attendance. You know, what's working well for you? What does it look like? What things do you check out, and how do you actually have access to that data in terms of what your school at the moment's looking like? Thoughts? How is it analysed? Do you analyse attendance? Do you have a look at that in your role as safeguarding?
Yeah, we have a part on full governors about attendance and how we're monitoring attendance and whether it's gone up and down. So we're looking at those figures on a termly basis.
Yeah, and do you have like example cases, anonymised cases in terms of what the school's done well in terms of intervention and what the impact has been from that?
I suppose I wouldn't say I've done a deep dive on a case, but I do have a conversation with Joe most terms about what we're doing to try and encourage people and or pupils to come into school, and what we're doing for the pupils that aren't coming into school.
Yeah, I think it's really good. And again, that connectivity in terms of siblings, in terms of just DSLs or the person responsible for attendance, do we actually make that wider connection with wider siblings and family? And do we have that cross conversation? Because it's part of a bigger picture sometimes, isn't it? That attendance absence. Got a lovely hand up there. Hello.
Hello, Sonia.
Sonia.
Hi. Yeah, what we do, so my responsibility at the Grange covers attendance and behaviour. So I have a termly meeting, a 3-month term meeting once a month with the head teacher and the attendance monitoring staff members, and we do look at case by case situations of those where they've got families that are not attending and how they're dealing with it, and exploring avenues to help them and the different strategies that they use. So in the main governing body meeting, it's just reported the percentages and that they're doing some strategies, but then I can do the deep dive within that one-to-one meeting.
Perfect. And that analysis, isn't it?
Can I just say that's really nice to support the staff there, because I think sometimes it feels like a hard work. You know, they're doing what they can, but if you're there to support them and recognise it, that's really welcomed. Thank you.
Yeah, it really is. And again, I know incredibly some schools the context changes. So in some schools it may be they're doing some work around the school holidays, in terms of how cheaper it is to book holidays abroad, which isn't in term time, and schools know in terms of what that attendance looks like at particular times. So it may be more to do with medical and illness and confidence within the early years framework of saying to parents, actually, we can work with you on this. And what I tend to ask schools when it comes to a lot of absence around medical conditions is the DfE statutory guidance managing long-term medical conditions. Have you considered that? And if it's a secondary school, it's things around mental health that can feed into that plan. And quite often we miss mental health out, and quite often secondary in particular, young people may say that actually they don't feel like they can attend school because of how they're feeling. So I always put that forward as well, as if you've not seen the DfE managing long-term medical conditions, and if you're looking as governors at patterns of absence, and if your data is showing that potentially it's around medical or long-term illness, including mental health, is to pull that guidance out, because once they've got a plan agreed, parents, young person, school nurse and a head teacher, then collectively we can have a really good plan around what it can look like, the school environment, to get them to engage back again with education. So that's one of the good things that I would say, is have a look at that guidance as well as governors. So we talked about allegations, we've gone through that, things around what do we look at, you know, how do you ask members of staff in terms of what they'd see, what would they do if they saw a member of staff act in a way that could have caused harm to a child or may cause harm to a child. One of the main things here, what we talk about in at LADO, because I attend every LADO meeting as well within the local authority, is that transferable risk element. And do they actually know that if something happens in their own homes or their own lives as such, which could lead into a transferable risk within the school, have they got that confidence to tell a head teacher? And that's really interesting. And do staff understand that? And do they actually know how to talk to a head teacher if there's something within their own home environment that would and could come into a LADO arena? And at the moment, we have seen an increase within LADO, and it's been the partners which have been the ones who have been arrested and part of criminal investigations, quite a lot of online activity. So that's a really interesting one that I take back to schools quite often, is do staff actually know, and would they actually have the confidence in sharing with head teachers or a DSL any concern in terms of their own thing? So there you go, we've got some updates coming through. What does that say, Helen? Is that related to what I'm saying?
It's about the mental health in primary school children that we were talking about just now. But yeah, we are aware there is some work around that, Nikki. I think from your point of view as a governor, I don't think there's any of our primary schools that don't recognise that and do what they can do to try and support the young people as much as they can. But it is sadly a growing feature, I think, across the country. But thank you for your observation.
Yeah, and then again, out connecting that to useful apps, things which are out there in keeping children safe in education, working together to safeguard children. The annexes at the back there possibly give you all the latest guidance. And what I would say is approved government websites where you can signpost children and families. And then how aligned is that to your website? So is it easy for me to find? I remember doing an Ofsted complaint, and it was a young person who actually went to Ofsted, and it was around mental health. and they were alleging that the school had failed in terms of their health and well-being. Actually, when we unpicked that school had 24 opportunities available for children within that school. And what I investigated a little bit more, I guess, is, but for that young person, would they have felt that they could do that? You know, do they feel? So this is my question when it comes to mental health. We have worry boxes in school, for example, or in some secondary schools, you may have a bully button or a report it now button in terms of ICT. And I remember saying this to a secondary ed recently when he said, well, we've had no reports. It's been zero. And I said, but have you asked the confidence as to why there's no reports? And we might have this, but have we done a little bit of consultation using students' voice to actually ask them that would they use it? And if they're not using it, why aren't they using it? And then we can actually look at that a little bit more. Is there something hidden that we're not seeing in terms of why some young people aren't feeling that they can't actually tell us until it gets to crisis? So I think we're doing some incredible work, aren't we, Helen, with me in mind within schools.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
And I think it's just recognising that we seem to be moving into I was talking to a couple of primary schools today. They absolutely know, Nikki, what you're saying, but it's quite tricky to work with both those young people and their families because it's a very unique situation for each of them. So they do the best they can to support those young people.
Yeah.
Christina's got a hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say for well-being of our children in school, we do have a new thing now where we do have some emojis or on some sticks, and then children get the sticks with the name, and we do that every morning. They put their name on the stick in the jar and how they feel, and then they reevaluate that after their dinner time to see if they feel the same. And if there's a pattern, like if a child is like sad or stuff like that every morning, then the teachers or the head teacher tries to actually have a look at the child and maybe try to speak to the parents to see if there's something going on with the child, which I think is really good.
I do. You know, it's like checking into it's like what we used to call calibration. You know, are we ready to learn? It makes you wonder if we need it for teachers sometimes as well. I know a teacher who used to have a sweet jar and they could judge how the staff felt by how many sweets disappeared off of that sweet jar on the table. And they said if it were actually empty, we knew we needed to do something for staff as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I think there's some lovely examples in a lot of schools in terms of them clouds, or our child can move and they don't have to be on that cloud all day. They've got a position at every lesson as well to come off of that. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Early help, like we said at the beginning of the presentation, that's something we have to capture within the audit. And if you're not aware of what early help is, very briefly, working together states early help is obviously there to support children of all ages. And we're looking at resiliency here. We need to improve the resilience of our families. It reduces the chance of a problem getting worse. And it's not individual, but a system of support delivered by local authorities and the partners working together and taking collective responsibility to provide the right provision in their area. And there's some examples there of a child who may benefit from early help. So it's a big list, it's an extensive list, and keeping children safe in education extends this as well in terms of the offer. But I've left it in this presentation this evening because, again, it may be that these are not reported to you at the moment in terms of your head teacher reports, but it might be something that you want to ask about. The hidden children, I used to call them the always children, the children who always do, but we sometimes miss them if we're not doing a pupil survey where they may tell us something that we may be missing. One of the things we're talking about at the moment is that young carer aspect, and how often do we update young people in understanding what that is, and do we actually present that again to your parents and community? Do you define young carers on your school website so everybody knows that we're actually picking them up as early as we can to offer them some beautiful support and some other opportunities, what we do have in North Lincolnshire for our young carers. And I'm passionate about that one, that's why I've owned it on there, within there. So that's there within there. Oh, thank you for coming through as well. So, shine a light areas. Sounds really good, doesn't it? That we all need a spotlight on us at the moment. So, when we're talking about shine a light at the beginning, did anyone remember what I said shine a light areas were and what they are really?
Getting the fathers more involved.
Yeah. We talked about local priorities and data. So our shine a light areas are new to the audit this year, but we had to provide key questions so that we can give assurances back to our CMARS board in terms of just how good our schools are at contributing towards them. And it may be this year that there are areas that you're still developing because some of this language may be new for you as a school. And it may be that you've not got a great deal of evidence at the moment. If there are any gaps on your annual audit this year within the shine a light areas, please email Helen and myself. And again, our emails will be on this presentation because there will be signposting available. Helen, you know every agency going, don't you? And we'll always know somebody will come in within your school to actually support or plan something in terms of an assembly or in terms of coming in and doing some staff training. So in terms of domestic abuse, we've got our Blue Door. If you're not aware, you can Google Blue Door and you'll see just what the quality of what they can offer your school. In terms of NSPCC, we do a lot of work with the NSPCC and again, what they can offer into your school in terms of assemblies and particular year sixes as well, if you've got primary schools in the room in terms of buddy and just what they can do there.
Just to add to that, Sarah, the NSPCC do have a lovely offer and there's no charge. So it is really nice to know that not all things that are free are poor, that it's really good quality stuff, but make use of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, that's why we're looking at that. So if there's any blanks, do let us know because it may be that you're only as good as what you know. And what we're trying to do this year, Helen and myself, is to build on the safeguarding policy and do an annex of contacts. Because Helen knows all these things in her head. We just want to make sure that it complements your safeguarding policy as we go forward. So I joined a year ago, and one of the things I'm still doing is learning new acronyms and new agency names over here in North Links. So that's what I'm wanting to build this year to complement that. And the NL Family app is the one at the moment where we're wanting to promote in terms of agency support. And the reason why we ask you as governors sometimes to just sample or ask about that analysis of what's coming through and your vulnerability of children within your schools is it complements your Ofsted really in terms of are you confident that them referrals are being made in a timely way? Are they quality referrals? You know, is it actually giving you an indication that the school is taking action? And they're not just doing a referral and batting it over. Actually, they're following it up if they don't get a response back. So they're not going to wait a week. If they're actually phoning something through, they're going to actually wanting to find out what's happening with that. And are they actually really confident in escalating if they're finding that they feel that things are meeting our one family approach in terms of need for targeted intervention? And actually, where's that dialogue going? And that's something we're working on, Helen, isn't it, with DSLs at the moment? It's just that narrative, that being very clear. And that's why this year in our safeguarding policy, we've aligned it to say you can actually use your professional dispute resolution process, but you've got to be very clear as a DSL when you're phoning that through. If you're working with a case that you feel is going round and round and round, and actually there's no improvement, deterioration, we might actually need to escalate that as well. So I wanted to bring that this evening to say that that is something else, as well as governors. How do you support your DSL through supervision opportunities as well, if they feel that things are really stuck for them families? So curriculum, we've talked a little bit, I guess we waylaid a little bit in terms of the mental health agenda within there, but we do that, don't we, through pupil voice. So again, it may be looking at what opportunities is there within your current school system to actually capture how children are feeling. And you actually use the public health local survey, which will give you some really good data, and it'll give you comparable data as well if you use that. you know, do you have young people who you may not know are part of youth groups, who are part of youth parliament, or part of youth student councils? Things about the Hope Act, which Ellen, you took part in as well. Things around, you know, are you actually adapting surveys? So if you feel, for example, online safety is a focus within your school, are you using the unique Safe for Schools app to create questionnaire, so you actually can align your curriculum to knowing what apps children are using, because it changes and the landscape changes. And I know Unique does some great work with schools, if you are really interested in the online safety world, of actually developing surveys with you, so you actually know then what you're going to be actually delivering against in terms of the online world and safety within there. So yeah, just things around, like I say, worry boxes, bully buttons. If you've got them, what's you thinking if they're never being used? Is it that we haven't got a problem, or is it because children are not wanting to use them because there's something there which is stopping them? I went into a school recently and young people said, well, we wouldn't use that, miss, because we're a grass if we do that. So, well, talk to me a little bit more. What does that mean? And what does that look like? And explain to me your worries around that. And that was a really good poignant moment. You know, in another school, they said, well, no, because we're older than that and we don't want to do that. And we don't want to stand up and we don't want to put something in there. So, okay, well, talk to me a little bit more about who your trusted adults are and what you feel. And it's about that confidence in when I actually disclose something to a member of staff, that they're going to actually hear me, they're going to actually work with me, they're going to support me. And I think that's a good question to ask children, is do you feel confident when you actually report concerns that they will be taken seriously, and what happens as a result of that, and do you see an improvement in what you do? And that to me is beautiful, and we can see that through practice. So your curriculum, hopefully you've got that link as well in terms of your PSHE lead. The acronyms change, don't they, all the time? And I actually praise the new guidance for PSHE curriculum this year, because it includes a number of topical safeguarding issues, including youth gambling. So we've done a lot of work with YGAM, haven't we, which is our Youth Gambling Association. And again, it's whether, again, we've had that connection and we understand where safeguarding fits within PSHE world. And does our DSL, that might be a key question for you as governors, do you ask your DSL how often they sit down with your PSHE coordinator? Or it may be that your DSL is both. That's a really interesting one, because it might have a number of roles. But I think looking at how, what I call is a hidden curriculum for safeguarding as well, what does that look like? And is it actually equipping our youngsters to live in modern day Britain, really, in terms of the local risks as well? That's a really good question to ask. So we're looking at evidence there. We're looking at evidence in terms of that you have actually got a curriculum linked, and you're actually being very... One recent Ofsted report actually commented on the quality of this. They actually use the word safeguarding curriculum, and I've never seen that in an Ofsted report for some years. So that word is starting to come through. So watch this space. That's an example that we don't want. This isn't from North Lincolnshire, by the way, because I will want to say all our schools have been judged as good for the last year. We've not got any school judged ineffective for safeguarding, and I hope that continues. But again, without student voice, we wouldn't know this, would we? So I've left this as an example today, because when you next get opportunity to reflect, it might be that you want to just reflect, do we actually ask our questions about this? Do we know that children do feel safe? They've got that adult in school. You know, things like LGBT young people, you know, how's that looking? Is it a plus ally group? Is it that we actually, everybody's in, sort of thing? And it talks about things there about sexualized behaviours, and that obviously, if you're aware, came on the back of a great report from Ofsted in terms of assuming it happens here, and every school should assume it's happening. And if we take that line for our young people, yeah, we need to consider that. So I've put that as an example that we don't have in North Lincolnshire, because our schools are really good. Training, hopefully you see your training records. There's a question there about how to check understanding. So when we talk about the early help and we talk about the one family approach, and the role of local family hubs, How would you check it? I think we've already given you some answers. How would you check 8.7 as a question, as a governor? What evidence would you expect to see in that column coming through? Thoughts?
I raised that question, to be fair, in the comments earlier on when we were talking about the family hubs. As I say, we've actually done the audit, and there was a lot of discussion around this part that the school really didn't understand what that was. And I think it's quite clear that probably the audits come out a bit earlier than the family hub information's come out.
Yeah, I remember your school. It was Joe. Yeah, Joe sent me a couple of questions the other day, which is great because it got that conversation flowing, didn't it? It really did. But the family hubs have been around there for 2 or 3 years, I guess, Ellen. We've been trying to develop that linkage, haven't we, to them?
They're becoming more robust, I think, as family hubs recently. But you're right. They've been there. It's, you know, they've been around, but I think the understanding of how they work with all their partner agencies, and particularly schools, is getting stronger. But you're right, James. I think it's, yeah, they've not been there, but I think advertising what they offer and really gaining momentum is just growing now.
And your professional curiosity might be, when was the last time you visited one?
Yeah, and I suppose, to be fair, for me, it's good Joe's got in touch with you, because we actually created an action plan. There were quite a few actions from the audit this year, and a couple of those were to follow up on this family hub and just what the school's role was within that.
Perfect. And that is, for me, more than anything, you're all giving your time up this evening, but I think for that contribution, it shows that actually the audit is bringing about a little bit of change as well. And, you know, I'm really welcome that. It's been beautiful to hear, hasn't it, Ellen, that example? As for me at the end of a busy day today.
Yeah, I think, and for everybody on the call tonight, it is just, it's still in development. So you've had your Sure Start centres, then your children's centres, and now we've got the family hub. So that's our sort of trajectory over the last few years for those of us that have been around for that length of time. But it's just staff reaching out, you know, not only schools, we've got other agencies and professionals, but obviously from a school point of view, you can signpost your families to the family hubs to go and get some sort of support. And that's any member of the family. I think that's important to remind us tonight. The family hubs are there for the whole family. That includes aunts, uncles, grandparents, you know, anybody that's part of that family unit. If they need some support, those family hubs should be there to support the whole family.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to go into one family approach, but if you're not aware of it, again, it's what I've said about early help, and that's basically it talks about a little bit more about what it does, and just really, again, reiterating keeping children safe in education, in terms of your role as a governor, in terms of discharging that function within there. So it talks about governing bodies and proprietors should ensure that mechanisms are in place to assist staff to understand and discharge their roles and responsibilities as set out in part 1 of this guidance in terms of keeping children safe in education. If we get that right, we get everything right. If you keep going back to that document, and just sometimes I would say have that cup of tea moment with your DSL, sit down and just say, you know, talk me through it. What does this look like in your setting at the moment? Is there something we're not covered? Because like I said, the audit only does so much. It doesn't cover the entirety of keeping children safe in education. I'm not going to talk through all these slides because I think it's much slides to talk about. You're going to get them as governors. And I've only pulled out of keeping children safe in education some pertinent things for governors. So I've pulled out that keyword in terms of the governor aspect, and then it's talked about what things you might want to consider, and other questions that you might want to ask as a governor. So again, we're talking about supervision, which links into your audit. We're talking about a model policy, which links into your audit. And we're talking about local risks sometimes as well. And I always put this one in because I'm also the prevent lead for education and the channel rep. And I also sit on the Protect and Prepare group. And one of the things that we talk about is our counter-terrorism local profile for North East. And is that actually shared with you as governors? You know, are you included in DSL circulation or updates or refresh, or does your DSL send to all of your staff team updates? Because they all should be signed up for this, and as governors you can sign up to this as well. I've just had an advisory board meeting this evening with adult community learning, and we've agreed as a board that we're all going to sign up to this, so we have the latest information from North East at our fingertips, and that's something you might want to consider as governors as well, so you actually understand that local profile and when we're talking about counter-terrorism. So that's just one example that I've put forward in these slides. When we looked at your training, as you can see, I was really happy with the results this year. We'd got a lot of improvements in terms of just what you're doing and the percentages within there. A random question, but is FGM
You've seen it
included with any audit? We'll do that live for you if you want at the end of the show. We'll do a show and tell, and we'll do a live check. You can put me on the spot and see where it is. Is that okay? But good question. I think the caveat could be, if it's not, it's part of the part 1 of keeping children safe in education. It's a statutory duty. So if we're talking about how schools discharge the function, then FGM is part of that. So you could check the understanding of keeping children safe in education part 1, because it includes a myriad of things, including FGM. It doesn't include things like breast ironing though, and breast flattening, which is within your safeguarding model policy. So that may be a good reflection that we're talking about the audit, we're talking about working together, we're talking about keeping children safe in education, but how often do you dissect your school's approved model safeguarding policy, which you approve as governors, and actually dissect that as well into practice, because that includes FGM as well within there. So I'm going to do a live show and tell at the end just to see on that one. We can do that. So as we move forward, single central record, it's very clear, isn't it? It's things around how do you know it? Do you check it? What do you do about that? You know, do you know what columns are needed? So one of the greatest things when I do my safeguarding reviews, I go into a school and they'll say to me, can you check my single central record? And I'll go, have you downloaded Keeping Children Safe in Education? Have you looked at all the paragraphs within the safer recruitment section, which tells you very clearly what has to be included in your single central record? And quite often the business manager has not downloaded Keeping Children Safe in Education, or has not really reflected. And sometimes when I've sat next to them and said, let's tick, let's red, amber, green, tick if it's there, and let's do a question mark if it's not, or highlight something if you think we need to do something differently. And that to me is just my little I don't know, gift to you as governors, is if you're unsure of what you're checking on a single central record, is just get them to reflect a little bit in terms of, have you looked at keeping children safe in education and done that self-assessment before I come in as a governor? How many governors have seen single central record in the room this evening?
Got one. Well done.
Yeah, I'm down as the governor for SCR. So I do a check, I do a full audit of it once a year, and then I check it once a term.
Perfect, thank you. So for governors who are now thinking, oh, we've not seen it, we don't know what one is, statutory, every school has to have one. It should show on that moment at a time, everybody working on a regular basis within that school. If Ofsted come into your school, they would go to your single central record. They only allow 24 hours for what they call minor changes within there. There shouldn't be any gaps within there, and it should include everything there, which is in this audit. And if you look at keeping children safe in education in its entirety, that is probably a question to your business manager in schools. When was the last time that you looked at keeping children safe in education alongside your single central record? And that could be a really good thing when you get your evidence column back. Have a look and see what the school's telling you in terms of what that looks like as evidence that they've checked, because the amount of inspections we've had recently where we've had to run around and check things and get assurances for schools during that inspection process, it's been quite a number of schools who have phoned us on that day to say, we're missing this, what do we do? or they've asked us about this and we've not got it. So no surprises with single central record, please. You know, we don't want that. We want to be ready for inspection. And it's not about...
Just to echo that, we had Ofsted in last year and I got absolutely grilled by Ofsted on the single point or single central register as well.
Absolutely.
Just to say, Sarah, there's a couple of people that haven't seen it. So what you've just said in terms of maybe that's something to check when you next go into school and ask those questions.
Yeah, and if you've not seen the guidance which Amy Altoff sent out, what we might want to do, and maybe want to show our hands, if you've not seen the guidance which Amy and myself did, we can recirculate the information on single central record. It includes things like prohibition checks, section 1 to 8 checks. Do you think that would be helpful if you wanted us to recirculate that information? Yeah. So that can be my action, is I'll ask Amy to recirculate to everybody in the group tonight that guidance that we sent out to schools. Brilliant. You'll be ready for that question now this year, won't you, when you get these audits back in? So again, behaviour, safety and security. We don't have to, again, talk about everything, but think about the evidence column again. What are schools going to be telling you that they're doing about it? So when we're talking about question 10.6, for example, things around physical intervention, is it consistent with DFE guidance? It might be that you want to take one step further there and look at your search and confiscation procedures, or it may be when you look at it and reflect on it, what are we actually wanting to see? So what I would be liking to see if I were a governor and exploring all of this, as well as the data being presented to me, just what you were saying, walk about, talk about, see it, look at your lunchtime, your break times, look at your before and your after school. I call it your gates. You know, you get that sense when you're on a gate of just what that is looking like in terms of safe environments. And we talk about positive environments where children can flourish. And it's a document we miss, which is referenced in Keeping Children Safe in Education. But it's the one that we tend to not click on. We click on working together, or what to do if you're worried a child's being abused. But we very rarely click on the positive environments where children can flourish. And I love that guidance. So again, if you've not seen it, you might want to think about, is that what my school's looking like at the moment? And do we actually use that guidance to reflect the beauty of the evidence which schools will be presenting here for you? Things around safety on school site. It's my big thing at the moment. I've just been with the National Security Counter-Terrorism Advisor today and Design Out Crime Officer. I sit on Protect and Prepare. So we're looking at site security. We know this has been a feature of your secondary heads meetings. We know it's been a feature of our DSL briefings. And the only thing I would ask here in terms of the evidence, and it might be something new for your school, so it might be part of an action plan, is something called ACT, which is Action Counters Terrorism. As that in your school, has anyone received that training? Have you embedded that at all within the school awareness for site? So your business people, your reception staff, do they actually know what they call a scan, which is part of the Act, which talks about suspicious packaging? Do we know about lockdowns? Have we practiced them procedures? Have all your head teachers got access to the MST critical incident folder, which we worked on in September? We had to move on that in response to the Southport tragedies. But we also felt that head teachers needed a really clear flow chart in terms of what to do in terms of a critical incident. So we worked on that and it looks something like this. So all your schools, it's in your model safeguarding policy as well, all your head teachers should have access to a number of folders, which again talks about emergency planning. It talks about the latest DFE templates for lockdowns, for example, and it gives them a really good flow chart. What we agreed over summer is we wanted a 24/7 number. We wanted that to be manned. We wanted one single point of contact. So a head teacher, when they're dealing with a crisis, don't have to phone 10 people at once and everybody does that. We wanted to bring it into a framework where there was one central number, and we agreed that command centre control, and they will actually liaise with a number of agencies on your behalf, and we'll have a wraparound care around your school, including a critical incident response. we recognise health and well-being of our head teachers and school leaders. So I brought that this evening because it may be the first time as governors you've seen this, so you know what we did over summer. But that might be something that you'll see in your audit, hopefully, in that question, you know, how are schools looking at site security and safety? Have they actually accessed that? Have they used the Act resources within your setting? Are you confident that we've got a lockdown procedure? And finally, we move on to interagency and reporting and recording. Things around quality of reports to conference. Have you ever dip sampled what that looks like when your DSL is actually attending what we call our initial child protection conferences or our review conferences? I am challenged in terms of the quality of reports to conference, and I have to also be challenged on attendance at conferences. And recently they gave me 2 examples of conference reports, and we've reflected a little bit on that and said, well, actually, how does a school know what good looks like, and how does a school know if we've never given them the framework on what a good quality report looks like? But we would expect, where possible, child views to be captured, and that can be some beautiful creative work by the child. It can be a picture, it can be a drawing, it can be something that they've done in school, and we're missing that quite often. And we're also missing any signatures from parents or carers, and they should certainly have that signature within conference reports. And I did ask that question, is it a regular thing that we're not sharing conference reports with parents? And that might be something you want to pick up on as well. And Kate's leaving. We're nearly finished, Kate, as well. We're nearly finishing on time. We're going to be 10 minutes early, but hopefully what you'll find, Kate, on the slides, you'll get a QR code. And if you can fill the QR code in your time, Kate, it'd be lovely. So that's something that I've put in there this year, is how do we actually check the quality of what's going through? And have you ever asked that challenge question in school? And again, for me, in terms of how do we know, in terms of confidence and quality, I always ask that question. Does your DSL attend our briefing sessions? Do they know where to access the latest slides on the CMARS website? And I think for me, that would give me the confidence, Helen, I don't know about you, that our staff are actually engaging with us as local authority and keeping up to tune with the latest information, the latest changes.
Yeah. Our Children's Mars website has got a lot of information for any professional, but we've got a dedicated sort of page for our designated safeguarding leads to access certain information. So we've strived to work with our board to make sure that's available to them.
We have. And finally, things around quality referrals. So again, if you were looking at with your DSL and you were auditing the quality of referrals, is it actually looking like this before they phone SPOC? So are they actually thinking about these questions in practice? And that again improves the quality of the information that we're sharing if we believe a child is in need of an assessment, for example, or we need to know why we're calling SPOC and the reason why we're wanting to raise that as a concern. And finally, the action plan. You know, you've contributed lovely, James, this evening in terms of what that action plan looks like year on year, and that you've already said you've supported, you've looked at really detailed areas. What I would ask is if it looks like this and it's blank, I always go back to a school to ask why it's blank. It might be that the school does feel everything's 100%, everything's in place, so it means that we don't have to develop anything. I'd actually say that, is that good for inspection? Because they'll be very happy that you've given me a warning. Sorry, somebody in Ashley Hubs told me I've got about 10 minutes and I've just said you'll be very happy with that, won't you? We'll offer you soon. So what I would say is with the action plan, the good quality ones that I like are where it's attached to a question where it's not in place or it's in part. So if somebody has actually said not in place, that's great. I'm not saying everything's got to be brilliant. And, you know, for me, I prefer somebody to be honest in terms of the response, because we can actually add it as a development plan. If something's partially in place, great, you know, put it onto the development plan, because it's very clear then in terms of some accountability for you as governors to be able to pick that up and actually say, great, you said that last year, just look at how far you've travelled this year. And I do believe safeguarding this week will be a different theme to what it might be next week. And actually we can use this quality framework to build on what we do in between audits. And that's what I'll always say to schools. Come on, tell me about your 3 things that you're really proud that you developed this year. And they'll think about it for a while and go, wow. And then they'll tell me some incredible things that they've done. And I'll say, where have you captured it? And they haven't captured it. So I think that's my plea, is if you're looking at your action plans from your schools, is please try not to send a blank one in, because I do think every school would have one area safeguarding to work on, if that makes sense to everybody this evening. And on that note, we've had a whistle-stop tour. I guess we'll look at the questions and we'll look at FGM, because I think that's a really interesting one. And maybe I'll show you CMARS, and then we can just leave you some time as governors to be brave. Talk to us in terms of, is there anything that you're going to take away from this evening's session? And do you personally have some actions from listening to wonderful colleagues? I know, James, you've done some great contributions this evening as well. Governors in the room, do you want to share with each other in terms of anything that you might not have had opportunity of sharing with each other in terms of what's working well for you as a governor in terms of auditing the quality of safeguarding within your school? And whilst you're doing that, I am going to show you that. You're going to get the slides anyway, but we've got a QR code for evaluation that we have to do. And we'll send the slides out probably by Friday, Helen. I'll make sure that I'll work with Amy and send it out with all the section 1 to 8 and the information, so it all goes out together. Is that okay with everybody?
There's no questions coming in at the minute.
Perfect. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of a flavour in terms of an audit, because it's quite hard to make a paper audit come alive and make it interesting. It's quite a challenge.
I think what I'd just add to what Sarah said to you this evening is, whilst the audit's coming into Sarah and us as a local authority staff, it really is for you just to be assured that your schools are as safe as they can be, or like Sarah's just said, you know, if there's developments to be made, it's just going to improve it. So
whilst you're doing that,
use it as a self-evaluation. Don't and really be robust with it. Don't kind of think, oh, we're fine, because it's one of those areas that's forever developing, really, and national guidance develops as well. So we're always going to have to be evolving, you know, the questions that we ask, and that supports yourselves in that.
So
lovely challenge back
the FGM question, I'm looking now, that's why I'm half looking. So I've looked, it's not within the audit for this year. And like I said, the caveat for me would be the keeping children safe in education, the part 1, that all staff have got that understanding, and it may be that you want to ask a fine-tuned question, and that's great too, to check understanding of that. And I'd be happy with that. Is there anything that we've talked about tonight that has been too quick for you, or any other thing that you think as a governor you'd like some more information on?
There's a couple of questions. Working together, communication, I think, is coming through.
In terms of find out more about working together.
Staff team. So for governors to support the staff in doing their jobs. Okay.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. And what I'm going to do, Helen, is add your email onto here as well.
Just to say, for your point of view, there's Sarah and myself, so we do try and support your designated safeguarding leads and the wider safeguarding team, because it is around the environment, so health and safety. So we're here to try and support as much as possible, and for all your schools, they do reach out to us